What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of this podcast. Familiar face with me back again. We didn't have the stand-in guy, this time around, so we're able to get the real one in here. How's it going, Mike?
Pretty good. Just another week. Not a whole lot of challenge news, so I guess that's what we're here for.
Yeah, a little bit of a slow week. I won't complain about having a little bit of a digestion period before we step into 40. But I think we're now seeing as fans, correct me if I'm wrong, this feels like the first time in ages where it feels like there's no challenge season happening, because it almost felt like for a little bit there we had spin-offs going on nonstop, right? And then we would hop right into a flagship and then hop right into an all-star. I'm sure there was a period that exists, but for me it kind of feels like this is the first real coming up for air sort of moment in the fandom right now.
Yeah, because we just had All-Stars 4, then there was Battle for a New Champion. Before that, there was USA 2, if you watched that. Before that, there was the World Championship.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a little break there. I think there might have been. But there's usually something cooking. And there are All-Stars 5. The filming is done. And we have 40 to look forward to, and there's a whole lot. I think the promo is going to really start ramping up with that season. So soon enough, we'll have Amanda back on our TV.
Yeah, well, that's one thing to look forward to. Yeah, we had on our last episode when we were rating non-champions' chances of winning. A few people felt that we had left out some omissions and didn't give their chances of winning. One of those, we could address in passing here if we want, and that was Fessy. We forgot to include him into what we felt like his chances were. I saw another person point out Ruthie as well. I guess we could have talked about her because she appeared on All-Stars 1. I guess the reason we didn't, though, is because, she had a big gap in between that and All-Stars 1 and hasn't appeared again, so it kind of was and then her final performance left kind of a lot to be desired, I felt, on All-Stars 1 anyway. So it was kind of just one of those things where I didn't really feel like we had to acknowledge it. But we could do definitely Fessy's, though, if you wanted to do that really quick before we get into today's topic.
Yeah, out of 10, I would give Fessy an 8 to eventually win. He's strong. Somehow hall brawls always just fall into his lap. He would face his mother in a hall brawl if given the opportunity. It doesn't even matter. But if you watched USA 2, he did really well in the final. He redeemed himself for all the things that people crap on him for. He did really well. He ate the food, he solved the puzzle. The thing that cost him the game was that he couldn't throw an axe, which, throwing weapons is becoming more prevalent with that elimination on All-Stars 4, but I do think that Fessy has a good shot.
I'll probably agree with you and go with an 8 as well. He kind of just feels like a shoo-in, as long to make it at least to because if you think about if we don't include Spies, Lies, and Allies and just look at his challenge arc, he goes to the final on Total Madness, goes to the final on Double Agents. Obviously, Spies, Lies gets kicked off. Ride or Die, I actually don't believe I watched him on that one, but correct me if I'm wrong. He didn't make the final on that one, right?
No, he was eliminated right before the final, and the elimination was one of the most carnival game eliminations I've ever seen. It's literally one where they have to climb a rope, which is a carnival game. You can climb the ladder and it will tip over. It was a bit more involved than what you would find at the county fair, but it was very much a carnival game. But then he made the final on USA 2.
Yeah, so the guy's track record is pretty strong right now in terms of making it to the end. So it kind of almost feels like inevitable in some ways, where it's just kind of going to fall into his lap, and he's just going to pick up a win one of these days. Um, but yeah, we could leave the non-champion discussion in the books for now, because today is going to be a topic that I feel like is going to tickle the fancy of a lot of fans, and it's called. Well, my personal title was actually going to be called "The Biggest Butterfly Effects in Challenge Histories," but to dumb it down a little bit, essentially, in a nutshell, it's just what ifs within the challenge and one of the biggest ones. And we're kind of just going to discuss basically one singular instance, and we've got 7 of them. He put out a tweet and it had a lot of submissions from fans. Some of the which were a little more loaded, such as like, what if so and so, didn't stop doing the show, or like, what if Kenny and Evan didn't get banned? Like, those are kind of like very loaded responses, and ones that are kind of more difficult to hop down the rabbit hole of, because we kind of can't really do hindsight with those, because that's more of like a production thing. Like, we have to assume that person's getting the call, accepting the call, what the theme might be, who they might. So there's a lot more loose ends with that. Whereas the topics we're going to be discussing today, we felt, and many that are going to be tuning into this will agree, these are instances that either shape the outcome of a season or would go on to later shape future seasons. And this is why we picked them, obviously. So, without further ado, before we hop into this, how do you feel about today's topic?
I think that, I love putting on my little tinfoil hat and speculating things, so I'm all for it. And yeah, I mean, like, certainly we couldn't talk about everything, and I really appreciate everyone that responds to my tweets with, just engaging with the banter. Because it's always fun to hear people's unpopular opinions and things like that. So if you did respond to me or Mike, thank you, because it really does help.
Yeah, I mean, people have really taken a liking to these last, however, basically since we've been doing this. So thank you all for the, support. Doesn't go unnoticed. But without further ado, we can now hop into this. And, normally when I'm doing any type of content, I like to go from like the bottom up and start slow and work my way up. But honestly, I just decided with this specific video, I'm just going to come out of the gate swing and start off kind of hot. And we're going to go with probably what you could argue is maybe the biggest butterfly effect in challenge history, maybe. And that is Big Easy on the Gauntlet 3. And, if you're unfamiliar by now, or just happen to live under a rock. No, I'm joking. If you're unfamiliar with Big Easy's Gauntlet 3, essentially what happened was the veterans team, which dominated the entire season, and decided to keep Big Easy around for the final because none of their guys obviously wanted to go into an elimination against him, because they felt like a lot of those eliminations might have catered to him because they were size-based. Whatever the case may be, they kept him around, and it ultimately backfired because he kind of broke down in the final and wasn't able to complete it, and he had to get taken to the hospital, and because of that, the veterans lost because they didn't finish with all their team members. This ultimately cost a lot of those people their first wins, some of which went on to get their wins later on eventually. However, others maybe didn't win, or just it took them a lot longer than it would have. So we're just basically going to break down like the effect in which this had and some of the other domino effects that it caused for some cast members. One that I actually don't think is talked about a lot is the effect that this might have had with Paula, because, we obviously know Paula went on to win both rival seasons. We're talking about in a world in which she gets a win here. I don't feel like not much else changes when it pertains to like her future rivals. I feel like that still plays out the way it does. However, we're looking at a world in which Paula is a 3-time champion. And, I think when people are comparing like who's the greatest female competitor in the history, oftentimes we see like the 3-time champions kind of hover above that, where it's like, Veronica gets looped in. I mean, Cara, if you want to count Champs Pros, is like 3-time, but like many people think she's 2-time. Whatever the case may be, I think Paula would get a lot more love as like a potential like female GOAT if like this win would have counted. So that's one domino effect. What is like some of yours when you think of this?
Well, I mean, it definitely. One thing that sticks out to me is looking at this. I just think of assuming the ruin still happens, which I think it does, because a lot of that was based around Wes and Kenny's beef. I think the team looks very different, and the ruins, the champions team, would be a lot less competitive because there was kind of some dead weight still on the veterans team.
Yeah.
At that final. I mean, like Adam has never won. Robin and DM never won, and they would have been champions if if Big Easy didn't collapse in the Gauntlet 2 final. Never mind the fact that the Ruins almost could have been a repeat because Big Easy would have been a champion. I mean, if he could win, anyone could win. And that's a really motivating thought.
CT would have, he would be 6-time challenge winner right now, I believe, right? Because he won, he would be a 6-time. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you count champs versus pros, stars.
Then he would, wow. So
Actually, 8 if you count both champs versus stars. Because he won 2 and 3.
Yeah, although the second one is probably the weakest of the 3. But I think that's the one, I don't know, I enjoyed the last 2, though, in terms of like...
the last one I thought was great, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I do think that CT winning that season probably wouldn't change much other than like his number of victories, because I still think he shows up to the duel 2 seasons later. I still think he punches at him. So there was no saving at him from that.
Yeah, I think the only thing that really changes is like you get a few more people with extra wins, and then like the Ruins lineup changes a little bit. I mean, like I said, mine was more of like a fun thing to play around with, like Paula potentially being like in GOAT contention, which kind of had my mind sparked with one that I didn't have listed on here that like I might throw in at the very end, because it had my mind thinking. But we could talk about the very next season for this next one, and this was Abram leaving the island early. For those that don't know, the island was where Johnny Bananas won his first season. However, if you pay attention closely to the island, I believe it was like episode 3, maybe, or something along. It's very early on. Yeah. Abram was essentially a shoo-in to kind of like walk to the end and win this final. Like everybody wanted him on their boat. He like took to this island like a fish to water. Like he was handy. He was referred to as probably arguably the best guy there on that season, just because of like how well he adapted to being on the island. He went and got the first key. Like he was pretty much sitting pretty for the remainder of that game, and everybody wanted him on their boat. However, he asked everybody to vote him out because he had to go and attend to some like work things at home, and he was in a face-off with Johnny. And despite him pleading with everybody to vote him out, it got awfully close to where people were still voting for Bananas to go home. And had Abram not requested that, Johnny Bananas would have went home like second, if we don't count Dave. Second, like face-off deliberation or whatever you want to call it, he would have gone home. So, and that's honestly a really big domino effect, because had Johnny not gotten his win on the island, he's on the Challengers team on the Ruins. if he's on the ruins. So one could make the argument that he doesn't get his win there either. So we're talking
I'm
about a world.
guessing in that case, Johnny is on the duel too. Johnny's not going to say no to a challenge.
Right.
At least at that point in his life, he wasn't going to say no. But does he win the duel too? Who knows? I mean, that's going too deep into the rabbit hole.
The reason why, so that's going deep into the rabbit hole, but I'm actually going to lean here and say that he doesn't win Duel 2, because if you think about it, him and Evan at that point in time on Duel 2 weren't like super close yet, and Kenny wouldn't have been there to like be the glue to hold them together. So I could totally see a scenario where like Evan, Mark, Brad, and Landon are just like, let's just get rid of this kid. Like, he's freaking annoying. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Oh, I totally see it. I definitely see that happening. I mean, we see the Gauntlet 3, and Evan has all these choices, and he's like, yeah, give me Johnny, my good friend Johnny, in the elimination. So I think that the rivalry that Johnny has with Tyler almost like could start to form with Evan if they're on the Duel 2 together, because Evan inevitably would probably do something to jeopardize Johnny's game, because that's just how Evan has always operated in these competitions.
And then Evan still throws the whole thing to go to law schools.
Yeah.
If they are. Yeah. So we're talking about, this is obviously very layered, folks, but we're talking about a world in which like Johnny possibly doesn't get a win until like maybe X is won. That's how like deep this like entire thing could possibly run. But yeah, Abram, I think it's safe to say, would have definitely gone to the end, one would have to guess, had he stayed there the entire time.
I would think so, but perhaps this is a bit of a hot take. I think if Abram sticks around, he does not do as well as people expect him to do. I think people see him as like an outdoorsy guy who can like start a fire and hunt for fruit and all that jazz. But Abram's going to want to go into every single challenge. He actually, believe it or not, shows up to these shows to compete. And eventually they're just not going to let him. Because he has a key. He doesn't need a second. He doesn't need a third. I mean, maybe he would go in and give a key to someone like Dunbar. But, you know, I think he would kind of like stress out with just being idle in the game for a long period. But I still think he makes it to the end because he had a key.
Yeah.
And no one's going to steal his key.
Yeah. And I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, there's a very good chance that had he stayed and Johnny went home, I think we're looking at Dunbar possibly winning his first challenge on that season too.
So that could be the case, but I wonder if Abram would work with Kenny, because they were kind of close on the Inferno 3-1 together, and it seemed like they had like a fake hatred for each other, but kind of like a nudge, we're friends.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been interesting. I mean, probably they would have maybe worked together because Kenny and Derek were kind of close, and like Abram respected Derek, so they probably would have like, I don't know, maybe formed a pack of sorts. But I think the final boat, if I had to say with a gun to my head, would have been Kenny, Derek, Abram, and Dunbar.
If they allowed it, 4 guys to be in a boat together, I mean, with all that weight and testosterone in there, it could just sink.
And Mountain Dew.
Yeah, yeah. So then we have another boat that has Robin and Jen and Ryan and Paula in it, and the men are sinking because it's too heavy in there. All the women, they can just float using their enhancements alone, and they'll make it to the end. Yeah. But as nice as this situation plays out in my head, I still think Abram wins. I think he wins the island. With whom? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we could continue with something that involves bananas, because next up we're talking about the Battle of the Exiled twist on X's 2. And again, this doesn't get talked about as much as it, and I've been harping on this for like about a month now. It's when I really racked my brain to think about how really layered this possibly could have been. So we know that Bananas and Nani came back towards the end after being eliminated earlier on. It kind of blew up Wes's game, and like him and Teresa kind of got like screwed after that. Had that not happened, this is my personal perspective. I think had Bananas and Nani not came back, we would have seen that Hall Brawl elimination that Wes and Teresa had to go into against Leroy and Nia. I think that would have been Leroy and Nia against Jordan and Sarah, in my opinion. Because I just think that the numbers at that point would have been against Jordan and Sarah. Because Wes had, at that point, Leroy and Nia in his pocket before Bananas came back, and the rookies as well. So I think that would have probably been what would have happened. And in my opinion, I think Leroy and Nia win. So if that were to take place, then Wes and Teresa go on to win that season. And then that would also mean that Jordan and Sarah don't get their first wins. But also, we're talking about a world in which maybe Sarah doesn't ever win. Because had that not taken place, her and Johnny wouldn't have been rivals. And to further that point, Rivals 3 possibly doesn't happen until, I mean, probably not for a little bit. I feel like at that point they were kind of in a hurting for Rivals, clearly, by evidence, by the cast we got. So we wouldn't have really had like anything to really sink our teeth into at that point with a Rivals theme had Johnny and Sarah not been opposed to each other. So that is a big one.
You know, this scenario is asking a lot of me because I don't want to think of a world where Nia doesn't stand up there and get into that fight with Nani. You know, that's one of the highlights of that of the franchise, in my opinion. I often think about, and I'm not kidding you, like this lives in my head rent free, when Nia is screaming at Nani and Teresa's just standing there like smiling ear to ear, like watching this fight go down. Like she's like, I am here in real life. And that wouldn't happen if they didn't bring back bring back Nani and Bananas. So, you know, it's hard to think about it, but I'll do it anyways. I definitely think that they go to the next challenge and Leroy and Nia are losing. Mm-hmm. They're losing that line to the one where Nia doesn't stand up. Everyone's just going to pummel on them. But I also think that Wes and Teresa are smart enough to kind of gang up on Jordan and Jordan and Sarah. So that probably makes sense that those two go into the next elimination. I think the rookies are making it to the end regardless.
Yeah.
I don't think people are going to want to take them out of the equation at the 11th hour. I think this would be a telltale moment for Jordan. If he's able to pull out this win against Leroy, even if it's Sarah holding back Teresa in the Hall Brawl, doing the bulk of the work, I think it would be like a huge feather in his cap. A lot of people would really give him respect for winning that Hall Brawl against Leroy, of all people, because he's a tank. But ultimately, I think if Wes and Teresa make it to the end, they win. Which gives us a world with Teresa as a champion, which, you know, that is, I kind of like thinking about that. So that's a plus.
We're trading in Sarah for Teresa winning a championship, essentially, is the whole takeaway from this. Yeah.
I guess that's how it goes.
Does Jordan probably still wins event? Well, yeah, I mean, I would guess that they would cast him for Dirty 30, and I guess he would still win.
Yeah, I would think that he might even be willing to do a season in between, like a Rivals 3 or whatever comes of season 26.
Yeah, but I definitely do think that Rivals 3 possibly doesn't happen as quickly as it did in real life. Because, I mean, what the hell would we have had really to... I mean, again, you know, we're talking about MTV and production. Like, they could probably string together freaking, like, anything if they wanted to, truthfully. But, like, we were, like, holding together some pairs by, like, rubber bands when we were casting Rivals 3. And that's with Johnny and Sarah. You know, if you exclude them...
I still think we get a Rivals 3 for that season. Is it co-ed Rivals 3? Maybe not. I think, and the reason I say that is because Battle of the Bloodlines wasn't so hot in terms of ratings when it came out. Mm-hmm. And Rivals, I think the producers view as kind of like a safer bet. It's a buzzy theme. But in order for it to be buzzy, you actually have to have rivalries like Sarah and Bananas. Yeah. And without them, who are they going to turn to for the rivalries? You could have Nani and Naya, or Teresa and Nani and Naya and Avery. You know, those could work. So I still think we have a Rivals 3, but does it give us like the Johnny Bananas and Sarah moment? No.
Yeah. Well, next up, we've got one that I feel like doesn't get talked about a huge amount, but people still know about it, and that's Nelson DQing on Dirty 30. So we do know that Nelson obviously got kicked off of Dirty 30 for, you know, kind of face mushing Derek K. And the reason why I feel like this one flies under the radar is because due to Nelson getting removed, this meant that in that final redemption challenge, 2 men were allowed to come back. And in a world in which that's not the case, CT's the only guy coming back, which means that Jordan doesn't go on to win Dirty 30. Now, had that been the case, I think we'd probably look at a world in where Derek K does.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to know. I mean, no disrespect to Derek K, but if you're having a season where the dirtiest player is meant to win, do you really want it to be Derek K? I mean, he's not really... It's kind of a surprise that he was on that season simply because the theme really doesn't cater to someone who is regarded as one of the nicer people despite being cast as a badass twice.
Yeah, he probably would have been better suited, I feel like, making his return on Invasion, probably. Just because I feel like he might have fit that a little bit better. Not that I'm complaining about him being on Dirty 30, but that does, you know, make a good point. However, if I'm just using like objectivity here, he probably wins Dirty 30 if we're under the assumption that Jordan gets purged. Because if you take a look at what the scenario would have been, Jordan wouldn't have been back in the game, which would have meant that it would have been CT, Derek, Hunter with like a broken hand at that point, and then Tony, who was clumsy at that point in time. So it's like, we would have had either Tony or Hunter taking the spot of,
or Nelson.
Oh yeah, because Nelson wouldn't have gotten. I mean, I don't really buy him as a serious threat of actually like winning the thing, but he could have made the final.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very real possibility that he makes the final. I think that weird little like suspension thing that Derek won, I think that would have been a moment where Nelson would have shined.
Oh, you're talking. Oh, yeah.
The very last thing before the purge at the end, where Kayla and Jenna got purged. Yeah. I forget what the name of that challenge was, but like where they swing across with a rope. I think Nelson, if he finds himself in that predicament, could win.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But there's also a possibility at the very end, Cara Maria and CT solve that puzzle, and one of the males would have to solve that puzzle as well. And we're looking at Derek, Tony, Hunter, or Nelson solving that puzzle. They're probably still in Argentina doing it. I don't know if they're going to be able to.
I don't know who would win that, to be honest.
Yeah,
that's like Yeah, I don't know. That's actually probably the best question to come. Who do you guys think in the comments would win a puzzle between Hunter, Derek K, Nelson, and Dirty 30 Tony? Um, Whoever you guys feel like that may be, please let us know because we have no idea. But
Yeah,
that's why it's fun to debate on this stuff.
but I do think, and I can't overstate this enough, how lucky Jordan is to have that win because of this. Because Nelson lost his cool, he got the biggest prize up at until that point on the challenge, like double what anyone had ever gotten before.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about people not getting something before. Darrell and Brad's situation on the ruins. This was one that came out of left field. Brad had kind of reached his boiling point at this point, and one bad night, led to a really unfortunate incident between these two. And ultimately, Darrell's squeaky clean record at this point, where every show that he had been on challenge wise, he had won, and he was pretty much penciled in to go to the end and win this one too, had this incident not occurred. So I guess that's really the one thing is there's a probably 90% chance Darrell would have gotten his fifth win. As for what happens with Brad, that's a little bit more of a dicey scenario because we're talking about Brad and Dunbar being two guys left remaining, and we would have had, correct me if I'm wrong, probably would have been two more guy eliminations because you had the one that Johnny went in against Dunbar in, and then that last elimination was just solely Casey against Susie because there were no more guys. So we're talking about Johnny going into that sort of pole wrestle variation against either Brad or Dunbar. This is going to sound crazy, but since Johnny, it would have been his choice. I see a world in which he chooses, because people for whatever reason view Dunbar as this stout, maybe unjustly so, but they viewed him as this big tough competitor for whatever reason at the time. So I feel if you look at some of Johnny's comments before that elimination too, he was trying, I don't know if you remember this, he was trying to convince Kenny that he should go in against Dunbar because he's oh, you're probably closer to his size. This is going to be something size-based. So with that in mind, I think that Johnny would have preferred to go in against Brad with that in mind.
To be honest with you, I don't think Johnny goes in. I think Darrell is going in.
Really?
I think they're just sending him in. I don't think they'll send him into the last elimination. I think they'll be like, you have so much money, you're too good. But I think that they would send him into the second to last elimination.
Well, if that's the case, I actually do think Darrell goes in against Dunbar.
Yeah, and I think that Darrell wins.
Oh yeah, I mean,
yeah. The real question is, do we think Brad goes to the final?
Because that last elimination was such a crapshoot. It was kicking a bit. It's very hard. There's certain people I mean, there's obviously, I don't know if you've heard the speculation that apparently the bamboo thing wouldn't budge during the Casey and Susie thing on Casey's side. I mean, maybe that's an actual thing. I don't know. But we're talking about that version of Casey, who at that time was I mean, with all due respect, didn't really bring much to the table from the competitive side. I mean, she would tell you that herself. I mean,
that was her whole strategy. She wasn't even trying in the challenges. She was picking the petals off the flowers and not climbing the ramp. She knew what she was. I respect her for that.
So yeah, we're talking about Brad going into that against maybe Bananas, maybe Derek, even if they decide to throw Darrell a bone for winning again, which it's such a crapshoot to even guess who would even win that. But let's use the hindsight of Brad just being in the final, because I feel no matter if he does win, no matter who he takes out, whether it be Darrell, Bananas, Derek, we're talking about three guys who aren't known, at least at that point in time, as being stout puzzle masters by any means.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna chime in if you don't mind on that.
Yeah,
I think Brad wins. I think producers see the same thing that they saw with Casey and Susie in the Brad potentially Bananas elimination. I would guess it would be Brad Bananas in that last elimination. They're making a show. Now, do you think that a group of 4 men and Susie are going to beat a group of 2 girls? Yeah, most people do. So I think that they want to have Brad on the team
to make some more intrigue.
To make it a more balanced final. I think that, to be honest with you, production was kind of like shitting bricks with that final, and they were like, this is not a final at all, because we have all of these strong champions going against potentially Casey. And I think that's why Casey's Bamboo, if it was tougher to break than Susie's, I think that's why. They wanted to ensure that they had at least a nimble team of 2 decent girls to race against the champions. So I think that with that theory in mind, Bananas gets the same treatment that Casey got. Get him out of the game, make the champions a little bit, or make the challengers a little bit stronger by having 1 male in the final.
Right. Which, I mean, does that change your outlook and how that final plays out if Brad's in it, or no? Okay.
No, the challengers lose. Whoever decided to put challengers against champions and thought we were going to have a different outcome is just out of their mind.
Well, here's what I heard. I heard that there was these 2 gentlemen like a month or so ago that actually did some revisionist history of what the challenger team should have or could have looked like. I don't know who they are, but maybe they. Yeah, I know it feels a little close to home, but yeah.
Doesn't ring a bell. Yeah. Never heard of it. Wasn't there.
No.
The challengers lose every time.
Yeah. Well, we've got this one that's a little more modern before we dive into some older stuff, kind of spice up the pot a little bit. And we've got this one from Double Agents, and this was Nani. It's what if Nani picked CT. Because if anybody knows that final elimination, which, the way the Double Agents format worked was very sloppy. Like, I mean, whoever guy got picked was allowed to, basically skip that final. That was the final elimination, right?
So, Nani won the final female elimination. No, Nani did not win. But after the final female elimination, Nani's partner was taken, and she was left to pick between Kyle or CT. And there was a final male elimination at the very end, the one that Kyle went into against Fessy. Lo and behold, it was a hall brawl, so, Fessy gets a hall brawl. But essentially what happened was, because CT was a rogue agent, he was not eligible to compete in the next mission, and he was not eligible to go into the next elimination, the next crater. So he was just going to get the female that didn't have a partner after that final male elimination.
Okay. So with it in mind that Nani would have picked CT, that would have meant then CT versus Fessy and Hall Brawl?
Not necessarily. It would have meant Kyle is definitely going to the final.
Yeah.
But it would have meant either there were 4 males in that final, so there was
Leroy, Corey.
Yeah, it probably would have been Corey versus
Fessy.
Fessy. That's what I'm thinking.
And that would have been a fun watch. Because listen, I don't care if this is going to make me sound like a fanboy or biased towards Corey, but I would not write off Corey so quickly against Fessy in that. I'm just saying, because we're talking about obviously Fessy's going to be favorite against most people, but Nelson gave Fessy a little bit of a run for his money, and we're talking about Nelson, who Yeah, he's a really strong guy, and like he's fit, but he doesn't have like the natural like. He's not like naturally athletic or coordinated. Like Corey, actually, from what I know, actually, well, for one, I mean, if you saw that season alone, he smoked Darrell in like that sprinting elimination. So we know that Corey's fast when it comes to like short like bursts and stuff. But Corey himself actually has a football background. Like he played football in college, so it's not like he's a slouch. You know what I mean? So, I don't feel like it's such a runaway that people might expect.
Yeah, now that we put it into words, I almost like feel like there is a world where production would have wanted to have Corey versus Fessy in the final, because
Corey avenging his friends.
yeah, on Total Madness the season prior, he skated by when Nelson stepped up, and now it's like it's Corey's moment to put up or shut up in a hall brawl, which Fessy always gets. He always gets the hall brawl at the very end. But if I was betting, I would bet on Fessy still, but it's not as clear. It's not as clear cut. I think that Corey stands a very real chance, and I think that Fessy, even if he won, would be in for a rude awakening.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what do we feel like that? So if Nani did pick CT, let's say, right? I'm assuming that she runs the final with him too.
Yes, at least to some degree. They get to that in the final. They would get to that, like the pile of dirt where they have to get like the crypt or whatever. Everything's called like a silly little spy name. They had to get a code.
I know what you're talking about. It was a redo of the first daily challenge of the season.
Yeah. And I think Amber actually won that.
So she got to choose, right?
And she had to choose. And I think she stuck with CT, but I also kind of got the impression that she stuck with CT because that was her partner going into it.
Right.
So I don't know. This could have been Nani's moment to win. I think if Nani was with CT, she stands a very, very strong chance of winning. She can run. She ran that final. That part she can do. I think CT rounds out where she needs some help. He gets the puzzles.
Yeah, you got to remember though, Amber was amazing with the running stuff and all that and eating in that final, but like she couldn't hit the broadside of a barn if you gave her like the puzzle like cheat sheet. You know what I mean? And she would tell you that herself, so I don't feel bad saying that.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch the mini final, like she did awful with math. Like, she's not a math person. She thinks a prime number is something you order on Amazon. Like, she's just not like, math's not her thing. So, CT, pretty good with math, pretty good with puzzles. Credit where it's due for CT. Like, he knows that those are part of the competition, and he's prepared. He's also like an engineer. I don't think people talk about this, but like he studied engineering in school.
Wow.
Yeah, like people don't really give him credit, but his background is definitely not something to sneeze at. Like I couldn't do it.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, Amber crushed that final in the parts that she was good at, but had she not been with a guy like CT to solve those puzzles for her, there's a real likelihood that she's either with. She would have been probably with Leroy, probably.
Yeah, I think there's a very real possibility that CT runs with Nani the whole time. Or maybe not the whole time, but at the end. I think there's a chance that Amber wins that cipher, puzzle, molehill, whatever you want to call it thing. But then when CT gets the opportunity to take a partner, he doesn't feel obligated to stick with Amber. Yeah. At that point, he recognizes Nani. He's like, Nani wanted me. Nani picked me. Nani needs this, and he runs with Nani, and I actually think she could win.
That would have been the ending of all endings. Wow.
Yeah, Leroy's final season, and his Vegas roommate takes the victory. Imagine that.
Good for Dustin. Oh, wait, no, we're talking about a different roommate.
Oh, yeah.
We got another one that we're throwing it back a ways to, and that's one that's very near and dear to your heart, as a matter of fact. Got this one submitted at the 11th hour. We've got, what if Beth beat Svetlana on the duel? Well, actually, no, she did beat her, but she just technically, didn't abide by, like, the really stupid rules that were put in place, where the carabiner, like, snapped off both in this one and then later on in the CT thing.
Yeah. This isn't the conversation, but I will just go on record by saying she won. Beth won. TJ clearly says, like, you can't just rip over and unclip and rip off the flag. And Beth didn't just rip off the flag. She ripped off the flag and unclipped it. She didn't just do it. Meanwhile, Svetlana is having a little fit over outside of the elimination arena. Like, if this was a pole wrestle and you stepped outside the circle, they'd at a minimum reset. But all of a sudden, because it's like a fixed lever, they disregard the boundaries. I don't know. It's a hot mess. Beth definitely won. We all saw it. We all know it.
I think it was a really just poorly constructed contraption, and they didn't correct their mistakes later on with CT either. Yeah. So that's kind of unfortunate how that happened twice in one season. I think Jody still wins probably.
So I think the biggest thing that happens if Beth wins, well, there are two things. I think Beth and Anissa become friends, which is kind of funny to think about. They kind of already were cool with each other. And watching the episode back, Svetlana's distaste for Beth seemed very out of left field. It sounded like the drama mafia got in her ear and kind of convinced her to work against Beth. But I think what really would have been interesting if Beth had won is that Beth would be the only one that would actually want to take a swing at Jody and not punch her like Tina. I don't mean that. But she would actually want to make a move that would jeopardize Jody's game, because Beth, to give her credit, she's not afraid to lose. She's been on a lot of seasons and lost them all, but she's not afraid of it. So I really think that she would try and she would see the bigger picture and be like, listen, Keena, you need to put Jody in there if you want to win in the end. And I think that she would try to get Jody in an elimination.
Well, whether Jody does or doesn't get actually eliminated, though, is the bigger question. I mean, maybe something mentally related if she got that she can get frazzled with, but I don't think anybody beats her in anything physical.
I don't think that – I definitely don't think that people are going to beat Jody in I can. I think the stars would have aligned on the season. And I think what would have happened was we would see Beth versus Jody and Push Me, and Jody would win. I think the end result of the season would be the same, but I think it would have been a lot more interesting to actually see Jody have to squirm a little bit, because she might be stronger than all these girls, but Beth matches her size-wise, and that is something that she was very afraid of on the pirate plank challenge. I actually think Beth won that. Mm-hmm. The one where they had to push each other off the pirate plank.
Well, who would have won? Well, it would have been Jody. I think still wins the season, but who would she have ran the final against? Anissa?
Probably, yeah.
Oh well, I mean, there you go.
I mean, that was before the Inferno 2. The Inferno 3. Anissa was in better shape, but yeah, she still did. I still don't think she beats Jody.
Oh my god. Well, this is actually one that we didn't have, but I thought about it when we were talking about the Gauntlet 3, so I might as well include it. I thought it was like a underrated one. Do you remember when Diem and CT won that daily challenge? I think it was maybe the second to last one, and they had the option to send in somebody against Ty and Emily, and they chose to send X is one. Yeah, they chose to send Dunbar. They chose to send Dunbar and Paula in instead of Johnny and Camilla. And I think that was a mistake. I think they should have sent Johnny and Camilla in because, spoiler alert, I actually think that Camilla and Johnny potentially lose in that particular elimination. I mean, well, we know that Emily would have handled her business against Camilla, but this is going to sound crazy. People hearing that Ty beating Bananas in elimination, they would be very shocked to hear that. But if you look at that elimination in particular, I feel like it actually catered to Ty's strengths because it was just.
Can you remind me, what was the elimination that they were in?
It was basically like it was like a minier version of like the T-bone thing where like you had to run and grab the balls and that like and return them back and forth into like your opponent's
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will be honest with you. I really don't think production wanted Bananas and Camilla to win. I really, like, in what world did they want, like, a laundry room hookup to be the face of the season? You know, I mean, Paula and Dunbar, they might not have been, like, they're the ideal couple to me, but for most people don't think that they're like the ideal couple, but
they spanned a few seasans at least.
Yeah,
storyline.
They have history, so like even if they made it to the end and they won, that would, for the sake of having an exit season, that would be pretty. It would be pretty satisfying, but I mean, I always think production wanted CT and Diem to win.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that, they got the hungry dogs at the first stage of the final. They were doing really well. So I think you're right. I think that if Bananas and Camilla face Emily and Ty, I mean, Camilla wasn't bad, but in what world does she beat Emily?
Nah, Emily would have won that. It would have came down to Bananas and Ty, but I'm telling you, people might be surprised to hear this. With Ty off first glance hearing that I think he would beat Bananas in this. If you go back and watch that elimination, it caters to Ty's strength. It doesn't involve anything like with endurance because, he is. I mean, to a degree it does, but it was very much so just like a sprinting thing. And Ty's not a bad, like, he's a fast guy. He just doesn't have like any gas left in his tank whatsoever. But, I think he would have shocked some people against Bananas, personally. I think that was, yeah.
Yeah, so who do you think makes the final? Do you think that Robin and Mark are in the final?
Well, so did Johnny and Camilla get last place in that final daily challenge?
Yeah, the helicopter or the airplane one, yeah.
Okay.
They were carrying, I don't know, Camilla was like carrying some pool inflatable and it like flew out to Kalamazoo and like they like could not figure out how to do it and they were the guinea pigs that went first.
Yeah. So I guess that really boils down to because I think CT and Diem would still win that daily challenge, even with Dunbar and Paula there. It would honestly boil down to who we feel would get last in that daily challenge if Johnny and Camilla aren't there. I mean, I can't. Do you remember how Emily and Ty or Mark and Robin did in that? By any chance?
I can't remember. I remember Mark and Robin did fairly well, I believe. I think like Robin's strategy was just to get like really low and essentially like shimmy her way across, which was really slow but actually effective, because getting low was just like better with the air pressure. But I still think CT and Diem win. I think that most likely we would have seen
Emily and Ty probably last again.
Yeah, Emily and Ty probably last.
And then,
Or Dunbar and Paula last.
all right. Well, I mean, in that scenario, I actually do still think that they throw Mark and Robin into elimination. I think, regardless of who the other, let's assume it's a world in which Ty and Emily or Dunbar and Paula are automatically in, right? Already, and the other one isn't. I think either way. I don't know, actually. That's a tough one because I was about to say either way, I think they would have threw a bone to whoever wouldn't have been in between those two teams, and they would have been like, okay, it's Mark and Robin's turn to go in. But I kind of feel like with DM's logic in real life, thinking like Dunbar and Paula were a marathon team, I don't want to see them in a final. Like, maybe there's a chance that they do get thrown in again. Like, I don't know. Like,
yeah, that's a good point. But I think in the end, CT and DM still win. I would guess it would probably be like Emily and Ty and Mark and Robin in the. I don't know. It's hard.
We know that Emily. If that were the case, Emily beats Robin. But do we think that Mark tries to win against Ty, or does he probably right? He probably doesn't cut a deal.
Yeah.
Like he did with Johnny, and he beats Ty, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I still think that they flip the coin and magically it lands on Emily. I theorize that they wanted Emily and Ty to make it to the end because they were kind of like the closest thing that they had to rookies that season that made it that far because Heather, Freudian slip, Dustin and Heather were disqualified. I think if they didn't get disqualified, they would have made it surprisingly far that season.
Well, I mean, they were performing pretty well in the short bit that we saw them. You know who else was performing really well in the short bit that we saw him? The GOAT himself, Vinny Fodi.
Yeah. He really was, though.
He was.
He was like, I mean, all 275 pounds of him were actually getting through these challenges pretty well.
It was so weird because he came in his first two seasons, like, people probably assumed, like, oh, this will be like your, Evan or Kenny for the second generation of fresh meat, just, based on, like, appearance alone. And then, like, he underwhelms, like, very poorly. I mean, he lost to Big Easy in an elimination that involved agility. So, like, do with that what you will. But then he comes in on X's after we don't see him for about one season, and he looked like he, like, ate both of the previous two versions of himself. That's, like, literally, but it was weird because he performed so much better. I rewatched this, like, a week or two ago, and, like, in the first daily challenge with the honey, him and Sarah did amazing, and then on the second one they won the thing. So, like, I mean, it was weird, but they were, like, actually performing well.
Yeah, it definitely is a weird thing to look back on. I mean, I think he's lost weight since, but regardless, like, some people just do better when they're a little bit bulkier. They fuel up and they have all the gas in the world to perform. And I guess he's one of those people. Like, we can rip on him all we want, but he was doing well.
I wish he didn't do what he did with the whole Mandy thing. I would have been interested to see how, like, that would have ended up playing out with Sarah. I don't think they, like, I think their luck would run out eventually. However, I don't know. He was kind of like, if you ever saw, I don't know if you've ever seen, but, like, the shit they should have shown, you know what that is, obviously, right? Like,
yeah.
They used to do it. There was one, I think it's on Daily Motion still, like, to watch, and there was the Cutthroat edition, and, like, they didn't show a lot of it, but he was, like, picking fights with everybody every day in the house. Vinny was, like, on Cutthroat. Like, he was getting into fights with, like, Siobhan, Chet. Like, people said he was, like, a complete riot. So I was like, I'd have been interested to see if like he continued to be messy because he was being messy with Wes. Like, and I mean, Wes would have ended up going home anyway, but like we saw glimpses of that on X's. Like, I'm not saying he had like long term potential, but we could have seen like some semblance of life from like a Fresh Meat 2 male cast member, because all we got, I mean, we got Brandon, who came back for a bunch of seasons, and he's a good guy and likable, but he doesn't really get super involved in like storylines. And then outside of him, that was pretty much it. You know,
We
like
had Luke for one season.
we had Luke for one season, and like he did a swan dive on the floor. And that
He made that final. He outperformed Abram in that final. So
oh yeah, here's the thing.
not for
Luke,
nothing.
Luke actually has a 3-1 elimination record, and he has his second place final finish. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I mean,
He swatted the hell out of Big Easy's face, so he's got
I
that
know.
feather in his cap.
Yeah, but it's wild to think about the potential that Sarah and Vinny actually had on X's, because they were winning. They were at the top when they were disqualified. So that was a very. I mean, it just stinks that it went down the way that it did. I mean, he did the crime, he got the punishment, and I'm not complaining about that. But you know, it's.
And that was like a time too where like they were just coming off the back of like literally just off the back, like they were still dealing with it in real time with the whole Kenny and Evan stuff. So like they that was very strictly enforced with Vinny. Like they, you know, I don't remember exactly, but I could have sworn that I saw, maybe it was like, because it's so long and old that like I wasn't able to actually listen to it, but Derek K, when he used to do his old like challenge radio thing or whatever, I think he had Vinny and Mandy on together, and like they pretty much like laughed about it after the fact or something like that. Even if it like whatever the case may be, I think the guy definitely got what was going to come to him regardless, because in that particular timeline, MTV wasn't going to play around when it came to that stuff. Like they definitely had an image to protect at that point. So like making that decision was in their best interest.
Yeah, but it's also one of those. I mean, this is getting a little bit off the deep end, because it definitely is one of those. I mean, I'm not defending Vinny whatsoever. Like, that's not something that you do.
Yeah.
But you are identifying something that is a very real factor in the equation, that MTV was trying to protect their brand. And in doing so, they take this moment that's kind of like just blurry, grainy footage from a club, and they put what could potentially be a very embarrassing and compromising moment for Mandy and use it kind of to make an example out of Vinny. I don't know how she feels about it. I mean, she really doesn't have anything to be embarrassed about.
Yeah.
But it is a moment that I'm sure, you know, she doesn't want to have to relive, and now production is using it as an example.
Do you think if the Kenny and Evan stuff weren't looming over their head at the time, that they would have kept them on the show?
I mean, all I'm going to say is watch the Real World Key West, and Johnny does the same thing to Janelle, and he stuck around.
There you go.
Yeah. So.
Another question I just thought of. Since we're on the topic of Luke, Vinny, and, you know, Fresh Meat 2, for an All-Star 6, if you had to guess off the top of your head, like, who would be the most likeliest, and you can't say Brandon, who would be, like, the likeliest in your opinion? Not who you would want. Actually, you could do who you want afterwards, but who do you think would be the most likeliest Fresh Meat 2 guy to just resurface on an All-Star season? Like, who, like, in using the lens of, like, production and just, like, hindsight, like, who do you feel like would be the most likeliest to pop up besides Brandon?
Oh, Jeff, obviously.
You know, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean,
I honestly think Pete.
Really?
Yeah, I think that he kind of seems willing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
He had kind of a lot of gusto behind him after Fresh Meat, and I think especially depending on how Aviv does on season 40. Um, he could almost have a similar storyline to her. I mean, I know he didn't win,
Yeah.
but he did make it through the whole season. He defied the odds. So he will be interesting to bring back, especially if somehow they got Gen G, his ex, on the cast.
Could you imagine if, like, holy shoot, like, if we're just following with the, formats here, why not make All-Star 6 like a true X's theme? Imagine that. And, like,
Yeah, my gut tells me it'd be cool. Like they wouldn't really.
Yeah, I mean, from what we know, and again, like, we're not flies on the wall, but it doesn't really seem like it was a messy breakup. From what I know, I think Pete was still in college at the time, and Jen was like just doing the shows and stuff. So it was probably It was long distance from what Pete. I think even at the Fresh Me 2 reunion, they acknowledged that too. Like they alluded to the fact that Jen was like Skyping with him and stuff, and like once a week or weekend or something like that would see him. So they probably making like the long distance thing work, and it just kind of probably just didn't work out. So I think they would be cool with each other because I think they're both like married now. From what I haven't spoken to Pete in years, but he was definitely. It's funny actually. So when Double Agents first came out, and I started recapping, and I was having like past people who hadn't been on the show in a while like come on and kind of just like look at it through the lens of like, holy shit, like this is what 2021 challenge looks like now compared to when I did it. And I actually had Pete on, and he, believe it or not, actually liked the show. Like he a lot. Like he was really into it. Like I remember he watched like maybe episode 2 of Double Agents. So, and he was like, "Oh shit, Teresa's back on this. I haven't seen her in forever." Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
He enjoyed it, and he sounded like, and he even said like, "Oh, I would 100% do this in a heartbeat." So
Yeah, I mean, watching Double Agents in 2020 or 2021, because it started airing in December of 2020, it was very different because we were like hurting for TV shows. There wasn't a whole lot going on. So like at the time I was like, yeah, it's going to be longer because they had to sequester people for a longer period of time. They want a bigger investment on this. And quite frankly, they have more eyeballs, and I mean, they could still make ridiculousness. So MTV wasn't hurting too bad. But they wanted to get their money's worth, and I understood that, and I appreciated the show for what it was. But it's like really hard to rewatch because it's just so drawn out.
And it's like a darker tone a little bit too. It's just like very dreary.
Yeah, it's not super like somber or anything, but it does almost like take you back. Like if they didn't pick like a beautiful, I mean, Iceland's beautiful in its own way.
It's just like very cloudy and
yeah, it's not like a tropical location where you're going to get everyone like half naked and like celebrating and drinking and having a good time. Like they have hot springs instead of beach barbecues in Iceland. Yeah. So, but credit where it's due. That was a hard season to pull off, and they pulled that one off. They pulled off Double Agents. Like I don't think they had any second quarantines or anything, to my knowledge. So hey, they made it work.
Well, listen, I'm gonna give my prediction here. This is who I think would be the likeliest from Fresh Me 2 out of the guys that pop up. This isn't necessarily who I want, though I'm not saying I wouldn't want him to have a second chance. There's just a few others that I would probably lean more towards, but this is going to be a wild take. I think Noor, I'm going to say, is probably the most likeliest, just because I think him and Brandon are close, and I can see a world in where Brandon's like putting in a word, and I think Noor just appeared at a Challenge Mania not too long ago, I want to say.
Ooh.
So,
I mean, kudos to Challenge Mania. It's like the opposite of the Kiss of Death. It's like the little olive branch being like, hey, people still love you.
yeah.
So I mean, if he did that, maybe he's interested, and that would be a great person to have back on the show.
But as for who I want, I mean, Pete would probably be number one, obviously. I would not mind whatsoever seeing Luke pop up back on an All-Stars, like randomly. It'd be very random, but I would not mind it whatsoever.
I agree with you because after Cutthroat, like there's no reason to believe that he's the slouch that they edited him to be on Fresh Meat 2. Like he did well.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing probably for his reputation that he ended when he did. Um, because I could easily see him like not having such a hot streak on the show, but it's kind of a shame that if there was more potential there, we didn't see it.
Yeah. Well, this wraps up another edition of the podcast, another fun chat, discussing some stuff. And, we're going to have to spitball some ideas going forward of like what we're going to do. Let us know both on Twitter and in the comments section of this video what you guys would like to see us talk about. His Twitter is a popular place, so I'm sure. Don't tell anybody.
Most of the time, people just think I'm the actual challenge account. Occasionally people like message me and say like, "How do I get on the show?" And I'll give them some sassy response.
It's the best kept secret in America, folks.
Yeah.
Alrighty, take it easy.
Yeah. Good chat.